Election day is over. The results are still coming in all across the country.
SDSU Associate Professor of Political Science Stephen Goggin is back to help us break it all down. Good morning. Good to see you.
Good morning.
All right, Proposition 50 passed.
Yes.
What happens now?
Well, so it won't take effect until next fall's elections in 2026, and these maps will be used in 2026, 2028, and 2030. And what's interesting is already, kind of elections are important, obviously, and not just who wins and who loses, but also what politicians read from them. And already we're seeing kind of President Trump posting last night and speaking with Republicans this morning, kind of seeing some of the effects of these wins, right, blowing potentially for next year. So while the maps won't take effect till next fall, already there's primaries that have to be based on these new maps in spring. And so we're already seeing, right, some of this shuffling behind the scenes, particularly for the Republicans who are affected by this and who are likely to lose their seats. Are they just going to not run again? Are they going to try to maybe move to a new district, or what game they might try to play there?
How do you explain to people that this was kind of somewhat of a reaction to what Texas did? Some people say, no, it's not the same thing. The governor said that's kind of what they're trying to balance out what Texas did with their congressional districts.
Right, and it was written into the ballot text itself, right? And the argument of the full campaign here is, one of the interesting things about kind of gerrymandering for a long time is it's really been kind of governed by a set of norms. Is you were kind of given, the Supreme Court gave kind of free license for partisan gerrymandering and decisions now the better part of a decade ago. Is, different states have played the game slightly differently in how far they're willing to go. But the framing of this as a response to Texas is they took 5 seats away from Democrats. We'll take 5 seats away from Republicans in the state, was a big kind of selling point of the campaign for this here. Of course, kind of the bigger story and context of this is other states arguably have been thinking about redistricting as well, whether Democrats following the lead of California or Republicans taking it further. I think one of the big takeaways from last night is that given the size of the margins, actually doing this further for Republicans is that trying to add a seat here or there, whether in Indiana or taking Texas's further or other states, just seems like a non-starter in this environment, because you can push it too far and then you just lose everywhere, not just the marginal seats.
Passed by 64% of the vote. Did we expect that this was going to happen?
I think it's not out of the realm of possibility. Most polling had it maybe 60-40 or so. I think the lead might shrink just a tiny bit, right, as a lot of the outstanding, particularly election day ballots get counted here. Definitely within the realm of possibility, particularly given kind of how the winds changed in the past several weeks, both with respect to spending on the behalf of kind of Republican candidates attempting to defeat it, pulling back some of the money there, but also just the fact that the Newsom team won kind of the framing of this, that it was really kind of framed as a referendum about Trump, not about, some nitty-gritty policy plan for how we change the state's maps. And once that frame kind of took hold as the dominant narrative, it's not surprising kind of it ran away with it.
How quickly are they going to redraw these maps? Because now we're a year away from the midterm elections. And it does say that in Prop 50 that in 2030 it goes back to the normal way of redistricting, correct?
Right, yeah, so it'll go back to the commission after the 2030 census, right? So we'll see what apportionment shakes out nationwide there. Apportionment being a relatively uncontroversial process, but it's likely California might lose a few seats depending on population change and gain, and it'll go back to that independent commission in 2030. So the maps that we'll have for 2026, 2028, and 2030 congressional elections were specified, right, in the proposition itself and in kind of the law, and we're in the voter pamphlet. And so those will be the maps that we'll use. A number of kind of small changes, particularly the most the biggest change in San Diego County, right, would be Darrell Issa's district, kind of heavily changed to be quite a bit more Democratic leaning. So unless something big changes, it seems likely that he will have a hard or uphill battle in next fall.
The numbers that we put up, this was not even close. California Republicans at some point thought they could defeat this. What, not even close.
Right. I think there are a couple explanations there, and President Trump himself last night said there are 2 reasons, right, for this, and one of them being that in fact, right, he's not on the ballot, which true, but also, right, winds have changed, but also the shutdown, right? The shutdown is something that's been ongoing for the past month, very displeasing to many government workers and other people directly affected by it. Part of the reason why we have such large margins in the Virginia race in particular, because of the number of federal employees there, and I think, right, that framing of kind of the government being shut down and just this general dissatisfaction didn't help, right? And that we saw probably a higher margin than we might expect otherwise for Prop 50 because of that shutdown. And I think that frame is really hard to shift away from. We've seen President Trump's poll numbers slide a bit in the past month too, to kind of historic lows. Is that kind of that general unpopularity and dissatisfaction with the cost of living, with the shutdown, with everything? It's a really hard tide to overcome.
Speaking of unpopularity, let's turn our attention to the Poway recall election. We have, I think, the numbers on that as well. Overwhelmingly, people there voting to recall Councilmember Tony Blaine.
You don't see 80% votes very often, do you, Stephen?
No, and you know, there still are quite a few outstanding votes, but that's a hill that's not really recoverable.
Right.
It's often quite hard to predict what will happen, particularly in municipal races like this and in recalls. You know, kind of recalls are often more effective at the local level like this, simply because it takes fewer signatures. It took, I believe, about 2,500 to get on the ballot, and so much lower threshold than the many you need, right, for a recall at the statewide level. Kind of given the accusations of wrongdoing here and the charges in court, it's not unsurprising. You know, recalls don't require you know, a kind of accusations of wrongdoing, but when those are involved, it is often, right, not a kind of a hard bet to place, right? Is that it often will be effective.
Were you surprised at any of the results from across the country? Virginia, wow, and in Jersey also. Obviously, the race for New York, I think we knew that was. Were you surprised by any of those races in terms of going back to the referendum thing, which a lot of people are talking about?
Yeah, I think, you know, part of it, and this is something that, you know, we've heard many pundits say, I'm sure, in the past week, but it's not just about who won, but about the margin of that. And I think the size of the margin is really indicative of kind of where the wins are, particularly with the shutdown, and kind of looking ahead to next year might be a big deal. In Virginia, not just the governor's race, right, with a kind of, I believe, like a 13-point margin there, but the House of Delegates in Virginia went from 51 Democrats to 49 Republicans to probably 64 Democrats, which is a huge swing. Is that, you know, state Senate races in Mississippi, a couple flipped, kind of breaking a Republican supermajority there. Is even kind of a lot of these lower level, not congressional, but rather assembly or delegates or house races, state house races, is the big margin shows that this tide is not just one race here or there. You can't just explain it from, oh, this was a good candidate or a bad candidate in this particular race. We're seeing it everywhere, and we're seeing it in lots of places you may not expect. Wow. Whether that turnout differential and stuff will hold next fall is, of course,
that's the key.
Right, that's the question, what people are asking.
All right, SDSU Associate Professor of Political Science. You know, I have a bachelor's in political science.
I do, yeah, and psychology, yeah.
But I walked away from all of it because it kind of made my head hurt after a while.
Right, yeah.
That's why we have you here to explain.
For sure.
Stephen
Well, there's a lot to it.
I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.